Good evening. We have a tragic and chilling update from downtown Seattle tonight, where a disturbing incident has unfolded at an apartment on Pine Street. Let's go straight to our correspondent, Michael Smith, who is at the scene. Michael, what can you tell us?
It's a grim scene here on Pine Street, where two individuals have been found dead in what appears to be a horrific act of violence involving paranormal beliefs. The victims have been identified as Jenny Richardson and Dr. Evelyn Hart, a well-known paranormal activity expert in the region. Authorities have indicated that the alleged perpetrator, identified as Sarah Thompson, was also found at the scene with injuries and has been rushed to Harborview Medical Center for treatment under police custody. The incident occurred late last night, sending shockwaves through this normally quiet neighborhood. Police have cordoned off the area as they investigate the circumstances surrounding this tragic event. Forensic teams are meticulously gathering evidence, and detectives are interviewing witnesses to piece together the timeline leading up to the incident. At this stage, the motive behind the attack remains unclear, but initial reports suggest a possible connection to Dr. Hart's work in the paranormal field. Neighbors have expressed deep concern and disbelief, describing the night as filled with unusual sounds and disturbances before authorities arrived. The community is urged to come forward with
any information that may assist in the investigation.
My name is Sarah and I was 20 years old when I first experienced paranormal activity. I had finally settled into my new apartment in Seattle. After days of unpacking boxes and arranging furniture, I could finally relax and enjoy my new space. It was an old, charming building in a quiet neighborhood with hardwood floors that creaked gently under my feet. The sound was comforting, blending seamlessly with the distant hum of city life outside. One evening, as I curled up on the couch with a cup of herbal tea, I felt a profound sense of peace. The soft glow of my table lamp bathed the room in a warm light, casting shadows that danced with the flicker of a few scented candles. I took in the cozy atmosphere, feeling proud of the home I had created for myself. The first few weeks in the apartment passed without incident. I enjoyed exploring the neighborhood, discovering little cafes and parks nearby. I even started a new job that I was excited about, and life seemed to be settling into a pleasant routine. My apartment quickly became my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind and find solace after busy days. One chilly October evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, I decided to treat myself to a long, relaxing bath. I filled the tub with steaming water, adding a generous pour of lavender-scented bath oil. As I soaked in the warmth, I let my mind wander, thinking about nothing in particular. When I stepped out of the bath, I noticed that the bathroom mirror had fogged up. Smiling at the familiar sight, I wrapped myself in a towel and wiped the condensation away with my hand. As I looked at my reflection, I felt an odd sense of déjà vu, but I brushed it off and went to bed, feeling content and ready for a good night's sleep. A few days later, I was getting ready for work when I noticed something strange. My favorite necklace, a delicate silver chain with a tiny heart pendant, was missing from its usual spot on my nightstand. I was certain I had placed it there the night before. After a frantic search, I found it in the bathroom sink, coiled neatly as if it had been placed there intentionally. Puzzled but in a rush, I dismissed it as my own forgetfulness. Another week went by, and I began to notice other small oddities. Books I left on the coffee table would appear on the kitchen counter. Picture frames seemed slightly tilted even though I remembered straightening them. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was adjusting to living alone in a new place. One Friday night, I had a few friends over for dinner. The evening was filled with laughter and lively conversation. At one point, my friend Jenny mentioned feeling a cold draft near the hallway, but we all laughed it off, attributing it to the old building's quirks. I didn't give it much thought at the time, enjoying the company and the warmth of friendship. It wasn't until a few days later that I experienced something I couldn't easily dismiss. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard a faint, muffled sound. It was like a soft whisper, barely audible but persistent enough to stir me from my drowsiness. I sat up, straining to hear, but the noise ceased as quickly as it had begun. Telling myself it was just the wind, I turned over and tried to sleep, though a lingering unease kept me from fully relaxing. The following morning, I woke up to find that my bedside lamp had been turned on. I distinctly remembered turning it off before going to bed. The air in the room felt colder than usual, and a shiver ran down my spine. I told myself it was just the chilly weather, but the nagging feeling of being watched lingered in the back of my mind. As the weeks went by, the sense of unease grew stronger. I would come home from work to find things slightly out of place, nothing dramatic, just small changes that left me feeling unsettled. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my routine and keeping busy. One evening, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. The crisp autumn air was refreshing, and the streets were lined with trees whose leaves had turned vibrant shades of red and gold. As I walked, I tried to shake off the feeling that had been creeping over me in my apartment, the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I returned home, I was greeted by a chilling draft as soon as I opened the door. I checked the windows, but they were all securely closed. Pushing the strange feeling aside, I made myself a cup of tea and settled on the couch with a book. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again, the faint whispering. This time, it seemed to come from the hallway just outside my bedroom. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened, trying to make out the words. But as before, the sound faded into silence. Unable to sleep, I got up and walked to the hallway. The air felt cold and heavy, as if it were charged with an unseen presence. I stood there for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. I couldn't ignore it any longer, something was not right in my apartment. I stood there in the cold, silent hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. The feeling of being watched had become almost tangible, wrapping around me like a shroud. As I turned back toward my bedroom, I could almost hear the walls whispering secrets just out of earshot. Trying to shake off the growing fear, I crawled back into bed, telling myself that a good night's sleep would help. The next evening, after another long day at work, I decided to try and relax with a movie. I had barely settled onto the couch when I heard a soft thud coming from the kitchen. I paused the movie, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. The silence that followed was thick and oppressive. Gathering my courage, I stood up and walked cautiously toward the kitchen. When I reached the doorway, I gasped. The cabinet doors, which I knew I had closed, were all standing wide open, their contents undisturbed but eerily exposed. I walked over and began closing them one by one, my hands trembling slightly. Just as I shut the last door, I heard a soft, almost childlike giggle behind me. I whipped around, my breath catching in my throat. The kitchen was empty, but the sound of the laugh lingered in the air, sending a chill down my spine. I hurried back to the living room, my mind racing. I tried to rationalize what I had just experienced, convincing myself that it must have been the building settling, or a trick of the wind. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The room seemed darker than usual, the shadows deeper and more menacing. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep, but a sudden creak made my eyes snap open. My heart leapt into my throat as I saw my bedside lamp turn on by itself, casting an eerie glow across the room. Before I could react, the light flickered and went out, plunging the room back into darkness. I sat up, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The air around me felt heavy, almost suffocating. I could hear a faint rustling, like someone was moving around in the hallway. I strained to listen, and there it was again, the soft, childlike giggle. This time, it was accompanied by a shadowy figure that flitted past my doorway, just out of the corner of my eye. Terrified, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I slowly got out of bed and made my way to the hallway, the beam of light trembling in my unsteady hand. The hallway was empty, but the cold, oppressive feeling persisted. I walked to the living room, my heart hammering in my chest. As I entered the living room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The coffee table, which had been in the center of the room, was now pushed against the far wall. The books that had been neatly stacked on it were strewn across the floor, and the framed photo of my family had been turned face down. I took a shaky breath, feeling a sense of dread wash over me. I bent down to pick up the books, my hands trembling. As I reached for the last one, a loud crash echoed through the apartment. I spun around, shining my flashlight toward the source of the noise. The kitchen cabinets were once again wide open, their doors banging against each other as if moved by an unseen hand. My pulse quickened as I heard the giggle again, louder this time, and accompanied by a faint whisper that seemed to drift from the kitchen. Panicking, I rushed back to my bedroom and slammed the door shut. I leaned against it, my breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. I grabbed my phone and dialed my friend Jenny's number. She answered groggily, her voice filled with concern as I told her what had been happening. "Sarah, you need to get out of there," she said urgently. "Come stay with me tonight, and we'll figure this out in the morning." I packed a bag hastily, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it up. I fled the apartment, the feeling of unseen eyes following me every step of the way. As I drove to Jenny's place, I couldn't shake the image of the shadowy figure and the sound of that haunting, childlike laugh. The next morning, Jenny and I returned to my apartment, the sunlight filtering through the windows making everything seem a bit less terrifying. We went through the apartment together, finding everything just as I had left it the night before. The cabinet doors were closed, the books were back on the coffee table, and the photo was upright and in its proper place. It was as if the apartment itself had reset, erasing any evidence of the previous night's events. Jenny and I sat down to discuss what to do next. Jenny and I sat in the living room, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. The apartment seemed normal, but the eerie events of the previous night lingered in my mind, casting a shadow over everything. We needed answers, and we decided to start with the history of the building. "We need to find out what happened here," Jenny said, her voice filled with determination. "There must be a reason for all this activity. Maybe the archives can tell us something." I nodded, grateful for her support. Together, we headed to the Seattle Municipal Archives, a grand old building nestled in the heart of the city. It was a place where the past was meticulously preserved, and we hoped it held the key to understanding what was haunting my apartment. The Archives building was a quiet sanctuary, its hushed corridors lined with shelves overflowing with records and documents. We approached the front desk, where a kindly older woman looked up from her work and greeted us with a warm smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked. "We're looking for information about a building," Jenny said. "It's an apartment on Pine Street. We've been experiencing some strange things, and we're hoping to learn more about its history." The woman's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "I see. Pine Street, you say? We have plenty of records from that area. Give me a moment, and I'll see what I can find." She disappeared into the back, and we waited anxiously, the silence of the archives pressing down on us. After a few minutes, she returned with a stack of old documents and photographs. "This is what we have on record," she said, spreading the papers out on the table before us. "There have been several buildings on that site over the years. The current structure dates back to the early 1900s, but before that, it was a boarding house. And before that, well, it was something else entirely." I leaned in, my eyes scanning the faded photographs and brittle pages. One photograph caught my attention. It was a black and white image of a grand, imposing mansion. The caption read, "The Henderson House, circa 1890. "What's the Henderson House?" I asked, pointing to the photo. The archivist peered over her glasses at the image. "Ah, yes. The Henderson House was quite famous in its day. It was built by a wealthy family, the Hendersons, in the late 1800s. They were prominent figures in Seattle society. But the house had a dark history." She flipped through a few more pages, finding a newspaper clipping with a headline that sent a chill down my spine: "Tragedy strikes Henderson family, child found dead in mysterious circumstances." The Hendersons had a daughter, Lily, the archivist continued. "She died under mysterious circumstances. Some say she fell from the stairs, others believe there was something more sinister at play. After her death, the family left the house, and it fell into disrepair." Jenny and I exchanged a glance, the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. The archivist handed me another photograph, this one showing a little girl with a hauntingly familiar face. "This is Lily," she said softly. "She was only 7 when she died." The girl's eyes seemed to stare directly at me, her expression both sad and knowing. I shivered, the image of the shadowy figure and the childlike giggle from my apartment flashing through my mind. After leaving the archives building, Jenny and I headed to the city's library, determined to uncover more about the paranormal activity haunting my apartment. The old library was a vast labyrinth of knowledge, its shelves packed with books on every subject imaginable. We spent hours poring over dusty tomes and yellowed newspaper clippings, searching for any mention of supernatural occurrences in the area. As I stood there in the library, surrounded by swirling books and flickering lights, a sense of dread washed over me. Jenny and I exchanged frantic glances, the realization sinking in that the paranormal activity had followed us outside the confines of my apartment. Books flew off the shelves, pages fluttering wildly as if propelled by an unseen force. Chairs crashed to the ground with deafening thuds, sending us scrambling for cover. And in the midst of the chaos, I saw her, a small, ghostly figure with piercing white eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. My heart pounded in my chest as I tentatively approached, reaching out to the spirit of Lily. But as I drew closer, I felt a wave of hostility emanating from her, an unmistakable aura of malevolence that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to speak, to reason with her, but my words were drowned out by the cacophony of flying books and crashing furniture. Lily's eyes bore into mine with an intensity that made my blood run cold, her gaze filled with an eerie emptiness that chilled me to the bone. And then, without warning, the chaos escalated. Books and chairs were hurled violently in our direction, forcing us to duck and dodge as we fought to avoid being hit. Lily's once ghostly form seemed to warp and twist, her features contorted into a terrifying mask of rage and malice. With a sinking feeling in my heart, I realized that we were not dealing with a lost spirit seeking peace. Lily was something darker, something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. And as we fled the library, the memory of those haunting white eyes burned into my mind, a chilling reminder of the evil that lurked within. With a sinking feeling in my heart, I realized that we were not dealing with a lost spirit seeking peace. As Jenny and I turned to leave the room, a cold hand closed around my wrist, freezing me in place. I glanced back, my heart pounding with fear, to see Lily's ghostly form standing before me, her eyes ablaze with an otherworldly intensity. Before I could react, Lily's hand shot out, gripping the sides of my face with a strength that belied her ethereal form. A jolt of electricity surged through me, and suddenly, I was engulfed in a whirlwind of memories, my own, and inexplicably, Lily's too. I saw fragments of my life flashing before my eyes, moments of joy and sadness, laughter and tears. But interspersed with my own memories were Lily's, a jumbled tapestry of her short life and untimely death. I saw her playing in the sunlit gardens of the Henderson house, her laughter ringing through the air like music. But beneath the surface, there was darkness, a shadowy figure lurking in the corners, watching, waiting. As the memories swirled around me, I felt a strange connection to Lily, a bond forged by shared experiences and shared pain. And in that moment of communion, I glimpsed the truth behind her anger, her torment, the darkness that had consumed her and refused to let go. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the vision faded, leaving me gasping for breath, my mind reeling from the onslaught of emotions. Lily released her grip on me, her ghostly form wavering in the dim light. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I saw something flicker in her gaze, a glimmer of recognition, of understanding. And then, with a final, haunting whisper, she vanished into the shadows, leaving me shaken but strangely enlightened. As Jenny helped me to my feet, I knew that our encounter with Lily had changed me in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. After our harrowing encounter with Lily, Jenny and I were left shaken and deeply unsettled. We stood in the library, the eerie silence pressing in around us, our minds racing with questions and fears. It was clear that we needed help, professional help, to understand what we were dealing with and how to put an end to the terrifying occurrences that had been haunting me. "Sarah, we can't handle this on our own," Jenny said, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to find someone who knows more about these kinds of things, someone who can help us understand what's happening and how to stop it." I nodded, still feeling the ghostly touch of Lily's cold hands on my face. The memories I had seen, both mine and Lily's, were a tangled mess in my mind, and I needed clarity. "You're right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to find an expert." With a sense of urgency, we gathered our things and left the library, determined to find someone who could help us navigate the dark waters we had found ourselves in. We needed someone with knowledge of the paranormal, someone who could offer us guidance and maybe even a solution. As we drove back to Jenny's apartment, we talked about our options. We remembered hearing about a renowned paranormal investigator in the city, someone with years of experience dealing with hauntings and spirits. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Hart, and she had a reputation for being both knowledgeable and compassionate. We decided she was our best chance. The next morning, Jenny and I made an appointment to see Dr. Hart. Her office was located in a nondescript building downtown, a place that exuded a sense of calm and professionalism. As we walked into the lobby, the receptionist greeted us with a warm smile. "Good morning," she said. How can I assist you today? We're here to see Dr. Hart, Jenny said. We have an appointment. Of course, the receptionist replied, checking her schedule. Dr. Hart is expecting you. Please have a seat, and she'll be with you shortly. We sat down, the tension palpable between us. My mind raced with thoughts of the apartment, Lily's ghost, and the memories that had flooded my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was at play, something that we had only begun to uncover. After a few minutes, the door to Dr. Hart's office opened, and a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and an air of authority stepped out. Sarah, Jenny, it's a pleasure to meet you, she said, extending her hand. Please, come in. We followed her into a cozy office filled with books and artifacts from around the world. The atmosphere was comforting, and I felt a small measure of hope. Tell me everything, Dr. Hart said, once we were seated. Leave no detail out. It's important that I understand the full scope of what's happening. I took a deep breath and began recounting the events from the beginning, the strange occurrences in my apartment, the unsettling encounters, and finally, the terrifying experience with Lily at the library. Dr. Hart listened intently, her expression serious and thoughtful. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. You've been through quite an ordeal, she said. From what you've described, it sounds like the spirit you're dealing with is in a state of unrest. Something has bound her to your apartment, and it's causing her to manifest in a very troubling way. Can you help us? Jenny asked, her voice tinged with desperation. Dr. Hart nodded. Yes, I can help. But it will require understanding the source of Lily's torment and finding a way to release her from it. We need to dig deeper into the history of your apartment and uncover what has caused the spirit to linger. Once we know that, we can begin to address the issue. I felt a surge of hope. What do we need to do? We'll start with a thorough investigation of the apartment, Dr. Hart said. I have equipment that can detect paranormal activity, and I'll need to spend some time there to understand the nature of the haunting. We'll also look into the history of the building and the events that led to Lily's death. With that information, we can formulate a plan to help her move on. Feeling a renewed sense of purpose, Jenny and I thanked Dr. Hart and left her office, filled with a cautious optimism. We were no longer alone in our struggle. Now, we had an expert on our side, someone who could help us unravel the mystery and, hopefully, bring peace to both Lily and ourselves. As we sat in Dr. Hart's office, recounting the terrifying events and seeking guidance, a sense of unease began to creep over me. I could feel a chill in the air, a familiar cold that seemed to seep into my bones. Dr. Hart's calm and compassionate demeanor provided some comfort, but a nagging feeling of dread lingered just beneath the surface. Dr. Hart leaned forward, her eyes focused on me with a mixture of concern and determination. Sarah, it's crucial that we understand the full extent of what's happening. Every detail, no matter how small, can help us piece together the puzzle. As I opened my mouth to respond, the temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly, and I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I glanced around, my eyes darting nervously, and then I saw her. Lily was standing in the corner of the room, her white eyes glaring at me with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. Her face was twisted into a snarl, a look of pure malevolence that sent a wave of fear crashing over me. It was as if she had followed me here, refusing to let me escape her grasp. My breath caught in my throat, and I tried to speak, to warn Dr. Hart and Jenny, but no words came out. Lily began to move toward me, her presence growing stronger with each step. The air around me seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. My pulse raced, and I could feel the panic rising within me. Sarah, Are you all right? Dr. Hart's voice cut through the haze of fear, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from Lily. She was getting closer, her eyes boring into mine, and I could feel an icy hand reaching out to grip my heart. Desperation took hold, and I scrambled to get away, crawling backward on the floor to put as much distance between us as possible. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of there, but my body felt frozen, trapped in a web of terror. "Sarah!" Jenny shouted, rushing to my side. "What's wrong?" Dr. Hart quickly moved to help, her face etched with concern. "Sarah, what do you see?" Lily," I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. "She's here. She's right there." But when I glanced back toward the corner of the room, Lily was gone. The space where she had stood was empty, and the oppressive cold began to dissipate. My heart was still pounding, and I struggled to catch my breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. Dr. Hart knelt beside me, her expression serious but kind. "Sarah, it's okay. You're safe here. Whatever you saw, it's not here anymore." Jenny helped me to my feet, her face pale with worry. "Sarah, we need to figure out what's going on. We need to help you." I nodded, still shaken but determined to find a way to end this nightmare. "She was here, Jenny. She was right there." I could feel her anger. She doesn't want us to help her." Dr. Hart guided me back to my seat, her voice soothing. "Sarah, it sounds like Lily's spirit is deeply troubled. Her presence here, away from your apartment, suggests a strong connection to you personally. This isn't just about a place, it's about you. We need to understand why." Taking a deep breath, I tried to calm myself, knowing that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. But with Dr. Hart's help, I hoped we could finally uncover the truth and bring an end to Lily's torment and mine. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. "You've been through quite an ordeal," she said. "From what you've described, it sounds like the spirit you're dealing with is in a state of unrest. Something has bound her to your apartment, and it's causing her to manifest in a very troubling way. Can you help us?" Jenny asked, her voice tinged with desperation. Dr. Hart nodded. "Yes, I can help. But it will require understanding the source of Lily's torment and finding a way to release her from it. We need to dig deeper into the history of your apartment and uncover what has caused the spirit to linger. Once we know that, we can begin to address the issue." I felt a surge of hope. "What do we need to do?" "We'll start with a thorough investigation of the apartment," Dr. Hart said. "I have equipment that can detect paranormal activity, and I'll need to spend some time there to understand the nature of the haunting. We'll also look into the history of the building and the events that led to Lily's death. With that information, we can formulate a plan to help her move on." Feeling a renewed sense of purpose, Jenny and I thanked Dr. Hart and left her office, filled with a cautious optimism. We were no longer alone in our struggle. Now, we had an expert on our side, someone who could help us unravel the mystery and, hopefully, bring peace to both Lily and ourselves. Back at the apartment, the air was thick with tension and anticipation as I, Jenny, and Dr. Hart meticulously placed our equipment around the space. Motion sensors, electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and audio recorders were strategically positioned, each aimed at capturing any signs of paranormal activity. I could feel a quiet, watchful energy pulsing through the apartment, shadows flickering in the corners, and the air growing thick with a sense of foreboding. Dr. Hart moved with a calm confidence that came from years of experience. She handled the equipment with practiced ease, her keen eyes assessing the environment. "Lily, we're here to help you," she called out gently, her voice echoing in the stillness. We want to understand what happened to you and find a way to bring you peace. We settled into the living room, the equipment humming softly in the background. The room was dim, illuminated only by the glow of our monitors and the occasional flicker from a candle. I sat on the couch, my heart pounding in my chest, while Jenny hovered nearby, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Hours passed with little more than a few faint blips on the EMF detector and some indistinct whispers captured on the audio recorders. The tension grew thicker, the oppressive silence pressing in on us from all sides. Just when we began to lose hope, a sudden chill filled the room, making our breath visible in the icy air. The lights on the equipment flickered, and the EMF detector spiked, its needle jumping erratically. The air seemed to crackle with electricity, a tangible energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "Lily?" Dr. Hart called out again, her voice calm but firm. "Are you here with us?" A sudden gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candle and plunging us into darkness. The monitors flickered and then died, leaving us in an eerie silence. My heart raced as I strained to see in the darkness. Suddenly, a childlike giggle echoed through the room, sending chills down my spine. I turned toward the sound, my eyes widening in fear. A faint, ghostly figure materialized in the center of the room, its form wavering like mist. It was Lily, her eyes glowing with an unearthly light. The air around her seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, and the room grew colder still. "Please, Lily," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We want to help you. What happened to you?" Lily's form flickered and then solidified, her face contorted with rage. She moved toward me with a terrifying swiftness, her ghostly hands reaching out. I felt a sudden, overwhelming force slam into my chest, knocking the breath from my lungs. I stumbled backward, my vision blurring as the room spun around me. The last thing I saw before everything went black was Lily's face, twisted with fury and pain. I found myself in a vast, dark void, feeling weightless and disoriented. The oppressive blackness seemed to stretch out infinitely in every direction. Panic began to bubble up in my chest as I struggled to comprehend where I was and how I had ended up there. Suddenly, a faint light appeared in the distance, growing brighter and more intense. Drawn to it, I moved toward the light, my steps slow and hesitant as if I were moving through a thick, invisible fog. As I got closer, I saw a familiar figure illuminated by the soft glow. It was Lily, her ghostly form bathed in an otherworldly light. She looked at me with wide, frightened eyes, her small frame trembling. "Lily?" I called out, my voice echoing in the vast emptiness. "Where are we? What's going on?" Lily's form flickered slightly, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "We're in the dream place," she said in a small, trembling voice. "I needed to bring you here because I'm trapped. There are two monsters, Sarah, and they won't let me go." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? What monsters?" Lily's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely above a whisper. "They tell me horrible things, Sarah. They make me see terrible things. They keep me here, in the dark, and I'm so scared." My heart ached for the little girl, my own fear momentarily overshadowed by a fierce determination to help. "What can I do, Lily? How can I stop them?" Lily took a shaky breath, her form flickering again. "You have to fight them. They're big and scary, but you're strong, Sarah. You can help me make them go away." As if in response to Lily's words, the darkness around us began to shift and writhe. Two towering figures emerged from the shadows, their forms twisted and monstrous. They loomed over us, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. A wave of fear washed over me, but I stood my ground, my gaze fixed on the terrifying figures. "Who are they, Lily? What do they want?" Lily clutched at my arm, her voice trembling. "They're the ones who keep me here. They say mean things and make me see bad things. They don't want me to leave." As we stood in the dark void, a sinister energy began to fill the air. The towering entities that had emerged from the shadows loomed closer, their forms grotesque and pulsating with malevolence. The oppressive presence was almost tangible, and I could feel my resolve starting to waver. Suddenly, with a roar that reverberated through the void, the entities lunged at me. Their dark, clawed hands reached out, grasping me with a force that felt like cold iron. I tried to resist, but their grip was unyielding, pulling me down into a swirling vortex of darkness. "Sarah!" Lily's voice echoed in the void, full of fear and desperation. "Don't leave me!" But the darkness swallowed me whole, and everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying on the cold, hard floor of a dimly lit room. The air was thick with the scent of mold and decay, and the sound of distant whispers echoed through the space. Slowly, I sat up, my head throbbing and my vision swimming. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized where I was. I was in a grand, decaying mansion. The walls were lined with faded, peeling wallpaper, and broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. The air was heavy with an oppressive sense of foreboding, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Lily?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. "Where are you?" There was no response, only the eerie silence of the abandoned house. I struggled to my feet, my mind racing. I had to find Lily and figure out a way to defeat the dark entities that had brought me here. As I moved through the dimly lit halls, the shadows seemed to shift and writhe around me. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind with a sense of dread. The oppressive silence of the mansion weighed heavily upon me as I moved through its empty halls. Each step I took echoed in the vast emptiness, stirring up motes of dust that danced in the faint shafts of light filtering through the cracked windows. It felt as if the very walls held their breath, waiting for something I couldn't yet comprehend. I paused in the doorway of a child's nursery, a room seemingly frozen in time. The air was colder here, infused with a lingering sense of innocence lost. Toys lay scattered across the floor, their colors faded, and the cheerful faces of dolls and stuffed animals now appeared haunting in their stillness. I hesitated by a small, weathered rocking horse, its paint peeling, its eyes dull and lifeless. A sense of sadness enveloped me, as if the room itself mourned for the past it once held. Drawn deeper into the mansion, I found myself standing in a grand hall, adorned with portraits of people from a bygone era. The eyes in the paintings seemed to follow me, their stern gazes piercing through the veil of time. Dusty chandeliers hung overhead, casting long, dancing shadows along the walls, like specters performing a ghostly ballet. At the end of the hall, an ornate mirror stood, its surface tarnished with age. I felt an inexplicable pull, a magnetic force urging me to approach. Reluctantly, I stepped closer, my reflection appearing ghostly against the dim light. The mansion seemed to hold its breath as my eyes met those of my own reflection. But it wasn't just my reflection that I saw. Shadows stirred within the depths of the mirror, swirling like dark wisps of smoke. Faces, contorted in anguish, flickered across the surface, faces that weren't mine but seemed to resonate with a shared torment. I gasped, scenes of sorrow, betrayal, and unspeakable fear unfolding before my eyes. Whispers began to fill the stillness, echoing through the halls. I strained to make out the words, a chill crawling down my spine as if invisible fingers brushed against my skin. Glimpses of a young girl flashed before my eyes, lost and alone in this vast, decaying labyrinth. My heart ached for her, sensing the weight of loneliness and despair that permeated the mansion's every corner. The air grew colder, my breath misting in front of me. I struggled to comprehend the horrors that had unfolded within these walls. It felt as if the mansion itself pulsed with a malevolent energy, a darkness that clung to the very air I breathed. "Why?" I whispered, my voice barely audible in the oppressive silence. "What happened here?" The mansion gave no answers, offering only the haunting echoes of its own secrets. My pulse quickened, and I felt a presence behind me, a breath of life animating the shadows, whispering of untold mysteries and forgotten sorrows. With a trembling hand, I reached out and touched the mirror's cold surface. The images wavered and then faded, leaving me alone in the dimly lit hall. I turned away, my mind racing with unanswered questions, my heart heavy with the weight of the mansion's tragic history. As I hurried back through the echoing corridors, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every corner I turned, every door I opened, led to more darkness and decay. Finally, I entered a large, once grand room that seemed vaguely familiar. It was the old parlor, with its ornate, dust-covered furniture and the remnants of what had once been a lavish decor. In the center of the room stood a large, cracked mirror, and reflected in it was a figure that made my blood run cold. It was Lily, standing with her back to me, her form almost transparent in the dim light. As I called out to her, my voice echoing through the decaying mansion, the two dark entities loomed menacingly over the young girl. Their twisted, shadowy forms seemed to pulse with malevolence, eyes glowing with a sinister light. Lily stood frozen, her small frame trembling under their oppressive presence. Without warning, the entities moved. Their movements were swift and brutal, shoving Lily back and forth between them like a rag doll. She cried out in fear and pain, her voice a heartbreaking echo in the cavernous room. The entities seemed to revel in her distress, their hissing laughter filling the air. "Stop!" I screamed, my voice breaking with desperation. I tried to rush forward, but the darkness seemed to hold me back, a barrier of cold, unyielding shadow. The entities ignored me, continuing their cruel game with Lily. One of them shoved her hard, and she stumbled backward, falling through a doorway that led into a long, narrow hallway. The force of the fall sent her sprawling on the floor, and she lay there, dazed and disoriented. "Lily!" I shouted, finally breaking free from the grip of the darkness. I ran to the doorway and saw Lily lying on the ground, the two entities advancing towards her with a slow, predatory gait. Ignoring the fear that clawed at my heart, I sprinted down the hallway towards Lily. The air grew colder with each step, and the walls seemed to close in around me, but I pressed on, my only thought to reach Lily and protect her from the looming threat. As I reached Lily, I dropped to my knees and pulled her into my arms. "Lily, are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling with concern. Lily nodded weakly, her eyes wide with fear. "They won't stop, Sarah," she whispered. "They want to hurt me." I then looked up at one of the entities. It was holding a knife. It was trying to kill me. So I yelled, "Run." I tried to defend myself without getting stabbed. The entity rushes and pins me to a wall. It was so strong that it overpowered me. It raises his arms about to stab me. But I rushed and bit his face as a last resort. The evil, malevolent entity screams in pain. As it was stinging in pain, I rushed forward to grab the knife from its hand and stabbed right to the forehead, killing and ending the life of this monster. The hallway's walls were ripping away, floating. There was one more entity to take town. I heard a scream behind me and I looked back. The entity was behind Lily, holding her in place. I yelled at the entity to let her go. Immediately, the dark spirit did, but instantly rushes to me. making me fall down while the entity was on top of me. It threw relentless punches at me. Punch after punch. It then used its hands to try and choke the life out of me. I then used the knife I had with my hands and stabbed the final entity in the gut. The dark entity gasped in pain and rolled to my side. My anger gets the better of me as I get on top of the entity and I wrap my fingers around the entity's neck, choking him. It tried to speak but couldn't. It was able to say one word, "Sarah, my name." My tight grip loosened a little bit, but my hands were still on its neck. It then says two final words. "Wake up," and then it starts fading away. The hallway turns back to the void and Lily was joyous that I ended the two entities. "You did it, Sarah," Lily said. "You freed me." I nodded at her, saying she can go now. But then I remembered the words that the dark entity told me. "Wake up." I asked Lily why would tell me that. And she shrugged her shoulders, indicating that she doesn't know. But something seemed odd. The way she responded was telling me that she knows why it said that. She then says, "Wake up and see for yourself." She smiled. I was confused. I then fell endlessly. I woke up and gasped. I got back to my body, but something was off. I was standing up. I looked around, calling Jenny and Dr. Hatt's name, but no responses. I go to the kitchen to look for them, but what I see is something horrifying and something unimaginable. I see Dr. Hart lying on the ground, dead on the floor with a wound on her face which looks like a knife wound. I looked around and yelled Jenny's name. I ran to my room and living room. No sign of her. I then hear grunting noises in the bathroom, so I run there and see Jenny struggling to breathe as a kitchen knife is stuck on her stomach. I ran to help her. I kneeled down and laid her to my arms, asking her what happened and who did this to her. She only said one final word before she died. And it left me shocked, guilty and traumatized for the rest of my life. You. The two dark entities that I killed in my fevered dreams were my friend Jenny and Dr. Hart. I took the lives of two innocent people. And then at the distance I hear sirens. I rush to look at the window and see them pulling up to my building. Someone called the cops on me. And honestly, I deserve to be in jail. I was easily manipulated, possessed into killing two people, and one of them was my friend. I then hear knocks on the door, assuming they are the police. I looked at the knife I got in my hands. As soon as the cops opened the door and aimed their firearm at me, ordering me to put the knife down, I thrust the knife to my gut. I fell down in pain, and then I blacked out. I woke up in a hospital bed. No one was in the room. As I looked outside the window, it was a stormy night. I looked around the room once more because I felt a whoosh. My heart was pounding since I was in a vulnerable state. Then at the corner of the room, I see her once again,